Harrison is such an important figure to me, well, and to many people, for many reasons. One of them being, he sort of was the unofficial ambassador of Hindustani classical music to the West. Now, what I find specifically interesting are sure those compositions that have, raga elements and, of course, Indian instruments, but also the way sitar articulation and ornamentation made its way into his leads and fills. So we're going to talk about all this stuff today. I'm Eric Haugen. Check the description box below for tabs and backing tracks on my website, information about exactly what sound tools I'm using, live streams, and more on Patreon, and my deep dive courses. It's all on my website. The story goes that while the Beatles were filming this scene for Help, George became absolutely fascinated with the sounds the musicians were creating. If you listen closely, they are playing Beatles tunes, which is probably what put the idea in his head to incorporate those sounds into future records. Apparently, it was David Crosby who told Harrison about Ravi Shankar, and George sought him out for sitar lessons. George's sitar playing makes its triumphant debut on Norwegian Wood. Now, I don't have a sitar or an electric sitar, but here's what that lick sounds like on this guitar. Wood is out of D Mixolydian, which I think the closest raga is Raga Kamaj, which is, a major scale. That's D major. You flat the 7th degree. So that little hook is just, and I'm keeping things close to where we recognize things. That's our first thing, and then a little... put a bend on it, because that'll sound kind of sitar-y. Yep, there's that. And if you want, you could drop it the octave into the John's vocal range. What is that? Before we go any further, I'm going to bring in my colleague from India, Akshay Chowdhury, to talk a little bit more about ragas.
Hey guys, how's it going? My name is Akshay, and I'm here to talk a little bit about Indian music and rags in particular. So, what is a raga or a rag? The word rag is a Sanskrit term that means color or passion. And that's exactly what it does. It colors the music to invoke a certain mood or feeling. Now, unlike scales or modes where you're free to weave in and out of the notes or intervals as you choose, each rag has a distinct set of rules when you're ascending and descending in terms of the notes being played. That being said, there are also characteristic phrases that give each rag its distinct personality or character. I would also like to mention that Indian music or rags in general are tied to the time of day or night that they're being played.
Okay, just a couple more things to review or point out. Ragas always take place over a drone, which is definitely different than Western music where we have chords moving around. The drone is just like the root and fifth. So in the case of Norwegian Wood, that was a D and an A. We're going to do a lot of stuff in C today, so there's going to be a lot of C drones, which is mostly a C with a G. Some other things about ragas. They're not exactly a scale. They're not just a melody. It's a scale with hundreds, honestly, of set phrases that those musicians can sing the solfege syllables for. We'll talk about that a little bit more later on. They memorize and then they improvise around those. So the structures are a lot like modes. So I'm going to say it once here. Be good at modes first, because that's like the Western cousin of ragas. And we'll talk a little bit more about that going forward. I did a little sleuthing, a little poking around. Here's a characteristic phrase from Raga Kamaj. Raga Kamaj. I don't know if I'm pronouncing this stuff right. But again, that is a C major scale. Flat the 7. So this is a cool little phrase. Let's see. Yeah, that starts to sound pretty sitar to get a 1 fret bend. Slide back. And then when you're on that note, Get that clean, and then I can hear how that may have inspired Within You Without You. So same scale, C Mixolydian, and let's see. One fret bend. And then a bend here. Cool. All right, and then it just does that again. One fret. Full bend. That's a little tricky to get down to there. And let's see. And you can, like, that note can be real quiet. Now, then this part's tricky to get this. That bend on that G tone, I use these two fingers. And then that's cool. And the last little part of, my sample here. I think that's cool because, some of these licks you could sneak into a blues jam, like, That's where, again, the raga rock starts to happen. So now we're going to get into ornaments, and there's some really unique things about sitar that makes it sound like that. Sitar has many, many strings, but really most of the melody is played on one string and all the extra strings are drones. So that's definitely, again, different than a guitar where we tend to move across the strings. The other big difference with a sitar is that it has these giant curvy frets that allow for slides and multi-tone bending, which that's the kicker right there. Trying to get that sound onto this yields really interesting results. Let's review some of the ornaments, though.
So if I
That little sample I pulled is C sharp, because that's actually a common tuning for sitar. So let's not do that. We're guitar players. Let's be in C, so it won't quite match up, but okay. Here's a C major scale on one string like a sitar would have. And then let's just do pull-offs going up. Neat. Okay, same thing. Again, we know these.
We can play the same notes by pulling the string outward from Re.
And this is, guitar, we can't quite do this one. I think let's do a hammer on and then a bend. Let's see how that goes. And then let's do the opposite, maybe a pre-bend, a release, and then a pull-off. Now you notice there I am blocking this G string, because again, on a sitar you can push that string anywhere you want. You're not going to bump into the other ones, but on a guitar, yeah. So side of this hand here is sitting on those other strings. Yeah, let's give it some overdrive.
We scrub the index, the middle, or both fingers up or down.
Okay, let's just do. You can see how thinking about scales and melody this way definitely gets you out of the up the ladder, down the ladder, bluesy bend sort of thinking. And yeah, this approach, this any other note can bend to any other note, you can hear that throughout George's playing on the later Beatles records. The solo to Dig a Pony is super cool because it's taking those ornaments and those articulations, but applying them to a song that has changes. And boom, that is, one of the things that, made George so freaking cool. Okay, starts on an A chord. This is an A. And then, that idea of, you know what? I don't need to, I'll bend it. And then he bends this note, so I actually switch my fingers out. And I switch them again because there's an eighth note rest there. So now, we're still in an A chord. And then, that's a tricky one. It gets all the way to this F sharp here. And then, so now we're on an F sharp minor. He knows that that's an F sharp minor, and then it has that really interesting John Lennon chord change of B minor to G7. And then this is so George, a 1.5 step bend. Watch, so he goes. 1.5 step. And it's kind of funny, it's an eighth note delayed there. So that lick. So he landed on that F because there's a G7, that's part of the chord. And then one of his pull off from the A, G, F. Big bend again because it goes back to the B minor. That time it goes right to the G. There's the G. And then it's on an E chord, so he does actually like a standard country guitar player thing. Harmonized double stop sixths is. So some final thoughts. Ragas are indeed more complicated than us Westerners may realize, because that thing of like being able to sing everything that you play, the sort of memorized phrases and then improvising around them. I mean, I guess that's similar to blues, where like when you learn the blues scale, there's sort of, typical blues licks you learn, but it's like to the next degree of that. So my honest advice is be good at modes first, because a lot of the modes, Phrygian, Lydian, Mixolydian, have Hindustani cousins. So like gets you closer to that. And those articulations, the slides, the hammer-ons, the pull-offs, the slide to the bend to the pull-off, thinking about things that way, that there's other ways to move through a scale. That combined with modes gets you pretty far. It gets you pretty far. I hope this video was helpful for you. If you enjoyed it, please like, subscribe, and share. That costs you nothing, and it helps me out a lot when people do that. One more time, how my business works. Patreon is where there's every backing track I've ever made and ever will make, live Q&A seminars, and more. I update that every week. And I also make comprehensive deep dive courses. You could check it all out on my website. As Bill and Ted would say, be excellent to each other. That includes yourself. Happy Friday. Eat pizza. Now I'll cut back to Akshay and let him play some ragas for us on the way out. Peace!